Namaskar and welcome back to Media Scan, your weekend dose of headlines, controversies and perspectives. In the trip of Prime Minister Narendra Modi to the United States of America, what was the treatment of the Western media, particularly the US media, with regard to this path-breaking visit? Did it reflect the significance, the depth of the conversations, the programs and the negotiations? Was it high on agenda but low on facts? Did we see a mismatch in the headlines and the realism? Let's discuss. Joining me here on Media Scan on this special episode this evening, Professor K.G. Suresh, media educator, senior veteran journalist and now Vice Chancellor of the Makhanlal Chaturvedi University. You have been hearing his views on Doordarshan for a long time. So good to have you, sir. Namaskar.
Thank you. Namaskar.
And with us, former ambassador, well-known diplomat Anil Trigunayat, not a new face on Media Scan also. Namaskar, sir. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Joining me on Media Scan for the first time this evening, senior journalist, researcher, has a strong ground to study the modern history of Jammu Kashmir, Zafar Iqbal Chaudhary, joining us from Jammu. Welcome, Zafar. Namaskar.
Thank you. Namaskar. Thank you. Namaskar.
And I'll come to you first, Anil Trigunayat. Sir, we were looking at the stories and the media reports that were appearing just ahead of the Prime Minister's visit and of course during the trip. And if there was one common headline or a common refrain that we kept noticing in most of the debates, it was the fact that India and the US do not really have any shared values. There is not too much warmth. There is a lot of mismatch of thoughts. But America is compelled to woo India and have a working relationship because of India's unique geographical positioning, because the US needs India to contain China in the seas, on the land. So basically, to put it in one line, the point was that India and the US are not quite supposed to be friends, but they are compelled to do so because of the exigency of the situation. As a diplomat, how do you look at this interpretation of things, sir, this perspective?
Well, Smriti, thank you very much to have me with these distinguished panelists once again. I have served in the United States for 3 years and handled 3 prime ministerial visits in the 90s. And every time a prime minister comes, you would like to have the maximum coverage possible in the media, because that is the way to approach the common masses on both sides. So whenever we used to approach earlier, there was a disdain. What's so great about leaders coming here? The hundreds of prime ministers and presidents keep floating around in the countries. There's nothing great. And then the media thought that if there is no friction, this is not news. And so, as you know, that there were some incidents that were reported much more and nothing great was coming out of it. But this time what you have seen is the media has been interested. The fact in the United States is a country that is led and broadly governed by various pressure groups. And pressure groups are also funded by various, including media houses, very well known, and is legal there, it is not illegal, by various countries as well. So, you know, there are competing interests. They want to create competing narratives. They want to show something. But at the end of the day, when the foreign policy's sole objective of any country for that matter is to serve its national interests. Now, national interest for India is having a greater relationship with the democracy, the biggest democracy, the oldest democracy in the world, and the largest democracy in the world coming together.
Yes.
Prime Minister Vajpayee had called us as natural partners or natural allies. The Obama also, everybody else has been contributing to the growth of this relationship. And so that's when we see this relationship and the way Prime Minister Modi was received, the way he's talked about, the kind of reception that he has got has been simply unique. No other leader in the United States has ever got this kind of a treatment. Now, this is not simply because the Americans started loving you today. But the fact is they have realized that India is a very strong country. It is a rising power. It is the fifth largest economy, aiming to become the third largest very soon, has its own mind as far as the foreign policy is concerned. It stands for peace, dialogue, and diplomacy. It is the biggest market. It is the most populous nation. It's a nuclear power. It's a superpower in a way. So how do you, and secondly, of course, China factor is very much there. They are not denying the fact. From the United States perspective, it is very clear. But at the same time, the fact that they have agreed to transfer this technology after the Civil Nuclear Cooperation Agreement in 2008, this is the first time that we are getting a very critical technology of jet deals coming to India. India is becoming an alternate choice for the multinationals. Now, you cannot coach the multinational company chiefs or CEOs what to talk about Modi when they say, I'm a fan of Modi, a Tesla person who is a Twitter chairman also. So I think that the media wants to see some kind of a conflict so that you give headlines that make it, but in reality, they also know that that is far from the truth. But this is not denying the fact that there are several interplaying forces at the same time. But the mutual interests of both the countries, the convergences are extremely important in this relationship.
Fine. Professor Suresh, there's nothing surprising in knowing that there are conflicting interests. In a big country like the US, it is natural to have different interests. That's how democracies work. However, to try to find or even create a conflict where there is none, that goes a little out of the way, even from a very independent media's point of view, doesn't it?
Well, Smita, I would like to take you back to 1976. You know, when Suriname became independent, imagine that was one of the last colonial outposts.
Yes.
And when it became a country becoming independent, in itself is big news. But the American headlines said, bauxite supplies to US won't be affected by Suriname freedom. So they were not concerned about the American. So they were not concerned about the larger issues. They were more concerned about, you know, their American self-interest. That has always been the guiding force. Now, having said this, you know, I believe that the current American coverage compared to what earlier the ambassador also said, they never, you know, felt it important to cover an Indian Prime Minister. They used to have a, you know, somewhere mention in some inner pages. That was how it used to be. But the way the kind of editorials that have been written, critical or otherwise, you know, is really massive. The very fact that they are, you know, standing up, they are sitting back and looking at, oh look, this is something that's happening. Now, it has been a mixed bag, I would say. It's not that it has been throughout only negative. Whether it's the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Guardian, you will feel that you will find that it has been a mixed bag. Of course, there have been
is that a change, having a mixed bag? Well, considering it used to be starkly critical till very recently.
Yes. So I look at it very positively.
Okay.
You see, the very fact that earlier they used to talk about only human rights violations and this has been there. It's not the first time they're talking about it. They have all been talking about it. And of course, in India, we may ask, look, who is talking? You can,
yes.
Given America's, you know, a record of human rights violations. So let's not get into that, whether the Bay of Pigs or whatever, you know, you call it. So they always had this narrative. That's an American narrative about telling the world how to conduct itself, that it's the most civilized nation in the world. So that's an American narrative that they continue to perpetrate. But having said that, the fact is that they have started noticing what we are. We are no more a country of snake charmers, diseases, backward, you know, with all the malnutrition that's happening. They have started recognizing us as a power to reckon with. This is very important. They have realized that, you know, we are a bulwark against. Why are we shying away from it? We are. That's our USP. You see, in a democratic world today, if there is any country which can stand up to China, it is India. That's our trademark. We have a very, very, you know, world's largest middle class population, huge consumer market we have. We are also emerging as a big manufacturing hub, and
So
that's what the Americans
are you saying,
want.
Professor Suresh, that things or factors which the US media or the commentators, the think tank
Yeah.
are trying to pin down upon us as a compulsion are actually things we should be upfront and happy about?
Yes, why
because
not?
that's
No.
an asset we
One
can
American-
galvanize.
Absolutely. One American newspaper put it that way, that in a very, very critical way, but they said that we may not be having shared values, but shared interest, yes. So,
Right.
so I think today's world, that's more important, that we have shared interest. I mean, they have their value systems, we have our value systems. We don't necessarily agree with their values. They have a problem of, I mean, if you look at it, they have a problem of our not taking a side on the Ukrainian entire thing.
I'll come to that also,
They have
yes.
a problem in our buying oil from Russia. They have a problem, but that's our, sovereign right.
And to be fair,
That's
it
very
did not
important.
stop them from, having a partnership with us.
Because they are very pragmatic, they are very realistic, because they recognize it is no more a one-sided dependency which used to be. We used to be dependent on the Americans, but today they need us perhaps more than we need them.
Fine, point taken. Zafar Iqbal Chaudhary, I'll come to you right away, and I'll take off from where Professor Suresh has, just flagged the issue that the Americans are, at least the American establishment is being pragmatic, and while we do have our differences and we might continue to have them, but they are not averse to looking at us as partners, and that is there for all of us to see. However, what would you say about all those media headlines, dozens of them I have here with me, which say that, the president has a sort of, in a way disappointed a big constituency in the US by not caring about the human rights issues, because they think, as they have put it, that the record of the current regime, the government is, something wanting on the human rights front, not to talk about what's going on in the West and particularly the US itself. How would you look at those headlines, and why do you think so much of thrust is being put on them by the media when such big things were happening at the same time? Zafar.
I don't know what kind of constituency has been left disappointed in the United States by the grand welcome that President Biden extended to Prime Minister Modi. I think that was really, really very well deserved. And some of these questions that American civil society or the American media has been raising about India, I think lately India has also been raising a lot of questions about what is happening, all these free arms and shootings and killings in the United States. So India has also been asking those questions recently. So I think a couple of points that I wanted to make, our previous, distinguished panelists have put across points very succinctly. But I think there is also a growing recognition in the United States of India's, standalone position in the world and on the world affairs, like India's engagement with Russia, India's engagement on the Russia-Ukraine war, India's stand on that. So India has been taken stands on world affairs quite independent of the US view of the world or the US policy of the world. So insofar as United States want India to be seen as a bulwark against China, that is United States intention. It's not necessarily that India wants to act as someone to, to the rescue of America, to the support of America, to show to the world that yes, we are a partner of America just because America wants us to be a bulwark against China. India has its own strategic relationships, at the number of difficulties we have had with China, but still Chinese foreign minister was in Delhi recently, and the participation in the G20 meetings has also been going on. So how I viewed this entire situation is that the United States itself took around 50 years to recognize India as an emerging great world power, and finding out a value in having, strategic alliance and partnerships and friendships with India. So this begins, I think, with Vajpayee, Clinton, Vajpayee, Bush, and then Manmohan Singh, Obama, continuing that, and then further deepened, because Prime Minister Modi had that kind of magic and charm of, making personal relationships with the world leaders. So had that kind of personal relationship with Biden and with the previous president, Donald Trump. And then that, you see, when he went to United States in 2019, they were looking forward to the elections. He spoke in support of President Donald Trump. But then he was able to stitch over a very wonderful relationship with President Biden as well. So now the United States can see I mean, the kind of reception that Prime Minister Modi received in the Congress last night, that was amazing. You know, this standing ovation of all the parliamentarians, all the congressmen there. How could the media not see that? Media could not recognize that, you know, what kind of reception the Prime Minister is getting there. What kind of deals, the partnerships and the agreements that are happening between India and the United States.
That brings me to an obvious question, Zafar. What we are seeing, you know, during our, when these are things we all can see. Obviously, the media present there can see it much better. Why do you think there is an effort to sort of play it down and bring up issues and headlines which, I mean, do not really, you know, constitute an element of the conversation?
So when I said
for
that America
instance,
itself took,
in the joint press conference, there was one question and the entire narrative seems to have been pinned down to that one question, ignoring so much else that was spoken.
So when I said that the US as a state took itself 50 years to recognize India as a partner, let's allow a little more time to the Western media also to recognize that, you know, you need to change your lens, you need to change your views to look at India as an emerging world power. So, I mean, there are issues in several countries. There are issues in several countries. We have to overcome those. Yeah.
So that's, I think, a very, I wouldn't say condescending, but a liberal way of, you know, allowing them the time and the margin to, you know, get to realism. Oh, I'll take you up on that in the next question, but I'll come back to Anil Trigunayat. Sir, we were just talking and Zafar mentioned about, you know, the Ukraine conflict. When the Ukraine conflict happened, and we have spoken about this on our show with you on an earlier episode, you know, sir, that when India decided to take a fiercely neutral and independent line on this entire situation, there were a lot of doomsday predictions saying that now the India and the West, particularly the US relations, are going to nosedive because India has decided not to toe the Western line and we will have to, you know, almost saying as if we will have to pay for that. Clearly that hasn't happened. We are seeing an entirely contradictory situation. India and the US are at a point they have never been before. So how would you look at those predictions? And why do you think the Ukraine situation has not proved as a dampener or even a factor when it comes to this growth in the partnership, this strengthening of the relationship?
You know, Smitaji, the thing is that the United States foreign policy is also self-centric. They have an alliance mindset. There is no doubt about it. That's the only thing they know. So they are beginning to learn through the minilaterals, through multilaterals, and understand other powers who are not on the same page with them. And they need each other rather more than before, because the global landscape is completely changing. And what was India's position? India's position, if you come to think of it, has been very consistent in the last 75 years. We are very similar. Whenever the situation arises, we take a view on the basis of the merits of the case. Now, the merits of the case is that the Russia-Ukraine war, everybody knows that what unilateralism the United States also perpetrated on certain other countries. So, unilateralism for superpowers is a way of life, in a way. They want to do what they want to do. But then you need countries like India, which can talk of some sanity. I mean, what at the end of the day, you want dialogue, diplomacy, and peace. So what was wrong? India was standing by the UN Charter. India was talking of sovereignty and territorial integrity of who? Ukraine. When we were talking from day one, we were in the Security Council at the time, and we are the ones who were driving it. Until today, Prime Minister Modi told President Putin also, in every time he told in bilateral dialogues, which were closed door, but when openly he told him at Samarkand, era of war is over. And he told the same thing to the United States. Now, the thing is, they have realized that this is India. India, and I also maintain always, that civilizational powers believe in strategic autonomy. They cannot be lackeys of a country or a thought process. And India has always maintained that and will maintain. So this is currently biggest change.
Very well analyzed, sir. Very well analyzed. But I have a quick question. Since you talked about the realization, whether it is the US or other Western countries, certainly to bring to the point of that realization, to make them realize why we take a certain position, certainly our leadership here, the way they treat their issues and the way they stand up to world powers also is an important factor, isn't it?
it is not only important, it is a very important factor. How you communicate, what is your position? You see, it is not just that we just vote in the one place or the other. We have maintained a consistent position, and not only that, the whole world really, the global south, the Middle East, everybody has come around to India's position. And so have the G7 countries who are still on the one side of the war. Russia understands. They are our global, I mean, their special privileged partner. US is our global comprehensive strategic partner. So I think that is the beauty of the Indian relationship, Indian leadership, and the dexterity as to how they're able to wade these very difficult and choppy waters.
Fine.
And this is what precisely when our foreign minister says that India is an independent force. That is something very important. Prime Minister Modi very clearly, openly says, articulates it, and he said it even in the Congress.
And no doubt, I think for a long time, we've not had a person speaking so clearly in such clear terms about India's position and our interests and some of the harsh facts of world powers at the multilateral level, the way we have our current Minister for External Affairs as Jaishankar. Coming to you, Professor Suresh, there is no doubt, as Ambassador Trigunayat was just saying, that we have managed to make the world understand why we take a certain position when we do, and it has made them realize, and they are coming round to our point of view. That is very, very visible. However, why is it that this question of a certain a line of thought about our minorities, particularly the Muslim population, is being peddled, it is being done to death by the foreign media in every single headline? And not just that, we have writers here and reporters and analysts in India who keep pushing as if in India there is a sort of a doomsday situation for the minority population, whereas all our indicators, all the data show that if there is any country in the world where the minority population is thriving and progressing as well as any other, it is in India. And the Prime Minister said it as much during his press conference. Why do you think there is this particular insistence on raising this minority question, which is not supported by facts?
Smita, whether it is India or America, let us accept one thing, whether it is academia or media, there has always been a dominance of the left liberal ideology, which has made certain issues very fashionable, and what is perturbing them is that when it was Trump was there, it was okay, Republicans certainly do it. The problem is that now not a Republican but a Democratic president is rolling out the red carpet for Mr. Modi, and that is what is hurting them very much. They felt that, and if you have seen, even Mr. Obama has given an interview in which he has said that these issues should be raised. He has talked about it, but he has also said that whether it is in public or in private, this issue should be raised. And I think maybe the stress given by the US administration is that some of these issues may not be taken up in public, but in private conversations between the two leaders, these issues would be raised. But the Prime Minister, and another factor that they highlighted, if you had seen all the newspapers, American newspapers, is the fact that the Prime Minister interacting with the media, which they felt is a breaking news for them, that he had decided that because he, according to them, the word they use is that he has always had scripted interactions even with the Indian media.
No, even this time, yes.
So when these two questions were asked, I remember the WSJ, Wall Street Journal headline was WSJ questions Modi on minorities issue, that was so I think that for them it's a fashion. As I said, every country has its own narrative that we stand for freedom. The duplicity, the double standards are known to us. What they did, the mess they did in Afghanistan, the mess they did in in West Asia, that is known to everybody. But still they have this very superficial fashionable things of talking about these things that they think is, we as a superpower, we have to talk about these. But I frankly speaking think that the pragmatic sections among the media, because I have read even editorials otherwise, I found that they are talking about the importance of this relationship. Of course America has its own interest, we have our own interest, including transfer of technology. So I think that yes, a certain amount of duplicity is there, but I see this as a positive thing, that the American media, the kind of attention they give to this current visit is something which has superseded all previous coverage in the United States of.
Very quickly, yes. Zafar Chaudhary, we have very little time left on the show. Your quick comment on what Professor Suresh was just saying, that despite all that stress on the human rights and other things, the coverage of the Western media has been far better than what it was so far. And the good professor would like to focus on the positives. But I want to ask you, Zafar, why is this insistence on the Muslim question when, as I asked him, and I'm asking you, the data, the facts do not corroborate it? And also, since you are there in Jammu and you have written profusely and we have read your books on Jammu Kashmir as well, do you think finally this single point focus on Kashmir all the time that we were all witness to whenever any dignitary came to India or an Indian leader went to tour the Western countries, finally we are out of that mindset quickly?
I think we have not heard any world leaders talking about Kashmir in the recent past, because India has told the world, India has told the world very clearly that if there is anything at all up to Kashmir, that's our internal affair and we'll have it settled down. I think that's how India has been approaching, and the world leaders are not talking about that. The second question about this minority, I think there is no country in the world where minorities don't have a little bit of problem here and there. But as far as India is concerned, what Prime Minister Modi said last night, I think there is what we can't find today or in the past or any time in the remote past a state-led discrimination against the minorities, whether that's Muslims or any other community in this country. So, but what has happened in the American media during recent visit of the Prime Minister, as a journalist you would understand, and Professor would also understand this, that there are some misleading headlines and then misleading intro, and then you go into the rest of the story that builds very well on the India-US relationship, that how it's shaping up, why it's important. So these are, provocative headlines and a couple of intro paragraphs, and rest of it is a very deepening, reporting and editorialized. They have, written in the editorials and the op-ed pages that why it is very important with regard to China, but also generally as two countries, both democracies, shared values. This shared interest, I think, has been used by one of the newspapers in a negative way, that America is choosing to overlook the shared values of democracy and they're getting more into the domain of interest. But I think shared values of democracy still, India and US share to a large extent.
Okay.
And now there are a lot of interest that they have to gather here. Yeah.
Yes, very clearly put, and I must say that you hit the nail when you said that a lot of it is actually a more of headline mongering than what you find in the actual text of the stories. So I think on this point we've already overshot our time by some seconds or minutes. So I think, gentlemen, it's time to wrap up this very interesting conversation for this evening. Thank you very much, Zafar, for joining us from Jammu Kashmir. We will surely get back to you in another episode.
Sure.
Also, Ambassador Trigunayat, always so gracious to join us. Thank you, sir. Professor Suresh, for joining us here in the studio after long time. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Viewers, as one of our guests has just pointed out, the coverage of the Western media, which they're always been wanting on certain respects, was actually a mixed bag this time, because even if grudgingly, many of the top media platforms agreed that the US cannot ignore India anymore, and that is what we saw reflecting in reality as well as in the media. And then, as one of our other guests has pointed out, some of it was more in the headlines and much less in the text. So on that interesting and curious note, it's a wrap up on Media Scan for this evening. Do join us next weekend. Namaskar. you.